Hello, dear viewer. If you're watching this in the summer of 2020, you'll know that the current state of the world has teachers and many others freaking out about how to keep working in a world where people can't gather in large groups and where we need to maintain a level of sanitation that would impress even Bubble Boy. I'm lucky enough not to be a teacher in the field right now. I'm still studying art education at college. But next spring, I'm supposed to start student teaching. Also next spring comes flu season, and we don't know what the world's going to look like. So I figure it's best to think ahead about these things and maybe learn some lessons, do some trial and error along the way. That's where ApArt comes in. I intend this project to be a series of video lessons and art-related tasks available for free online through my YouTube channel and an attached Google Classroom page. I'm kind of starting this as a means of tutoring several people that I know all at the same time, but also opening it up to be able to be used by anyone who's interested, and so I can share it with anyone who's interested. While you can watch these videos just for the sake of watching them, I think real learning happens when you actually do something with what you learn, when you actually apply it. So that's where the Google Classroom page comes in, where you can respond to prompts in written form, and you'll also find prompts for actual art making, all based on the videos that I upload and the content that I'll be sharing through these videos. So if you so choose, you'll have videos available to you on a YouTube channel and then corresponding tasks on the Google Classroom page. I'm going to try and upload these regularly, potentially throughout the summer and throughout the school year, but that depends on my schedule. I'm going to try and title them and make them in such a way that you can follow along at your own pace anytime from now to far in the future. I don't intend these to be very similar to the things that you may see around YouTube already. I'm talking about one-off lessons where somebody teaches you how to make a specific project and then they say go for it and show us your responses. But rather, I intend this to be kind of my ideal curriculum in art delivered through video means. Kind of like a flipped classroom available for free. That being the case, these ideas are probably going to build off of each other and play into one another. So it's best to watch these videos in order if you intend to watch them at all. This first series of videos that I make, if I intend to continue doing this, will be a sort of beginner art series, kind of like your high school intro to 2D art. This kind of stuff is useful for anyone who is just getting started and trying to look at and understand and make art, but who hasn't had a whole lot of art training. So probably not ideal for an advanced artist, but not too advanced for, say, a middle schooler. With all that being said, this video is not only an introduction to this project, but also to my idea of what it means to study art at all. So welcome to the pilot episode. What does it mean to study art? I learned to teach art with the discipline-based approach. I won't bore you with the details, but for people who become my students or watch my videos, this means two things. Number one, I see art as a set of ideas that can be taught and learned over time. This seems simple, but it's as opposed to the idea that art is something you inherently have inside of your brain that has to cultivate and develop on its own without any outside influence, and there's some sort of mystical magic up in here. I don't think that's true. I think that there are ideas that other artists have come up with and mixed and mashed, and methods that they have developed and skills that they've learned that we can study and learn to improve our own art making and our own ability to look at and understand art. To me, art is like a science in that way. Other artists have come up with ideas and figured things out, and we can build off of those, adopting some of those ideas that we like to make better art ourselves. These are ideas like how Renaissance painters came up with and used the idea of linear perspective, which is something we may talk about, how the ancient Greeks versus Romans of certain periods would have defined beauty, how Puebloan pots used flat earth-toned colors and geometric shapes, and how the Silk Road and the trade of art between Japan and Europe shows through in the art of Vincent van Gogh. These are all ideas that we can look at and learn to A, better understand artwork and the visual world around us, and B, adopt and use in our own artworks. The second thing that my discipline-based approach means is that I split art into four major branches of knowledge that you can talk about. Chances are, if you're talking about art, you're talking about one of these four major branches. These are like the earth, air, wind, and fire of studying and learning about art. These four ideas, called the disciplines of art, are art production, art history, art criticism, and art aesthetics. I feel it's important to learn about these four ideas because it puts a little bit of method to the madness of studying art, and it gives you a structure to understand what we're talking about here. So if your art teacher asks you to do something, or you're watching an art-related video, you can say, this is mostly a production thing, or we're learning some criticism concepts from art history. It just makes things make more sense. So now let's talk about what each of these four mean individually. Starting with art production, also sometimes called art studio. This is the area of art that we're probably all most familiar with. It's about learning to actually make stuff, whether you're picking up a pencil and paper to do a self-portrait, following along with a Bob Ross episode, or watching a glass-blowing demonstration at a Renaissance fair. If it's just about the process of making art, then it's art production, producing art. It seems simple, but it gets a little bit more complicated once you start to throw the other disciplines into the mix. Next is art history, which also seems pretty self-explanatory. It's about studying dead artists and the artworks that they made. Kind of. It's about more than that, though. It's about learning context, or the circumstances of when an artwork was made, who made it, what their influences were, and what the world was like when they made the artwork, and how any of that shows through in the final piece. It's hard to study Picasso's Guernica without talking about the 1937 Nazi bombings of Guernica, Spain. It doesn't make sense that this artist used charcoal and crushed berries to make paintings of horses on cave walls, until you realize it's the Lascaux cave walls and it was made by ancient human beings roughly 17,000 years ago. It may not make sense if it were made in the modern day, but putting it in context helps us understand. By studying these contexts, we can get a better idea of what these artworks might mean, or what they might have meant for the people they were made for. It also helps us locate ourselves and our ideas within the context of art history, and relate to other artists who are doing similar things to what maybe we're doing. Do you like the idea of making paintings from nature that show light bouncing off the tree leaves? You might draw some inspiration from the Impressionists. Do you like very stiff and realistic paintings of people that show strength and moral conviction? You might draw some inspiration from neoclassical painters. Do you want to make art that's just visually beautiful or interesting without needing to be of anything? Then there is a whole world of abstraction for you. My point here is that art is never made in a vacuum. Everyone comes from a context or a background or an environment that affects what they do and what they make. Consider that before groaning about just looking at a bunch of art by dead people. Art criticism. This is where things begin to get a little bit more complicated. You may be familiar with the term criticism. It's about determining whether something is good or bad. In art, determining whether an artwork is good or bad, like Rotten Tomatoes for paintings and sculptures. Again, not exactly. If it's about deciding between good and bad, it's hard to say what good and bad art is, and who gets to decide between good and bad. That's a conversation that we'll have when we get to aesthetics. Art criticism is much more about understanding what makes an artwork work. It's like getting under the hood of a painting, sculpture, etc., and pointing out how all the parts work together to send a message. It's where things like the elements and principles of art come in. You may have heard of these. They're some of the most basic parts you can break an artwork down into. Kind of like the elements on the periodic table are some of the most basic parts that you can break down the universe and matter into. It's helpful to have these elements and principles because it helps us put words to what we're seeing. If I'm looking at this sculpture, I can see that repetition and this color orange are very important here. If I'm looking at this, I instantly notice the texture, for better or for worse. Visual qualities, or features that you can see, are what make the artwork work. Visual qualities are more than just the elements and principles, though. They're anything that you can see in an artwork that helps send a message. Because visual art is all about what you can see, and studying these visual qualities helps us read artworks better. It helps us put a finger on why we're having the reaction that we are, and why we think the way we do. It also helps us be more intentional as we create our own artworks. These visual qualities that we talked about can become your visual tools that you can pick up and use when you are making art. Studying how Japanese artists broke down plants into simple marks, for example, could inspire a certain Dutch painter who also had a knack for simplifying. Whoa there, art history is sneaking its way into how I'm connecting art criticism with art production. Do you see how interconnected these things are? Aesthetics is maybe the most heady and intellectual of the four disciplines, so here's how I'll describe it. You know philosophy, that study of the nature of life and why we exist? Aesthetics is like that for art. It deals with questions such as, what is the nature of art and beauty? It's the big questions, the moral issues, the questions of who is really the artist here. If I tell you that a certain artist uses assistants for 90% of the work in the work that they make, who's really the artist there? That's an issue of aesthetics. If I ask you, what even is art? That's another aesthetic issue. There is rarely just one single correct answer in aesthetics. It can also explore the issue of what an artwork means to us. If I'm looking at an artwork and trying to decide what it's saying to me, that's an aesthetics-based way of looking at art. But wait, isn't that art criticism? Outstanding question. It's very easy to get aesthetics and criticism confused. The two go hand in hand, and they both deal with issues that don't always have one right answer. But we have to make sure that we keep them distinct, because they're not the same thing. In high school, I had a literature teacher whose go-to question after having us read a book, a poem, a play, or whatever was, what is its meaning, and how is it achieved? In other words, what is the story, or in our case, artwork, trying to say to us, and how does the author or writer, in our case, the artist, show you that through their work? The what is its meaning part would be aesthetics. The how is it achieved part would be criticism. So there you have it, the four disciplines of art: production, history, criticism, and aesthetics. I won't always talk about them this clearly and this distinctly from one another. They all meld and mesh into one another, and I'll use them together a lot. but they're always there, always watching. Oftentimes, I'll use the disciplines for how they connect to one another, like how knowing about Picasso's life can help us discuss some of his controversies, or knowing how the visual qualities of 1970s furniture design can inform your own design style. It's important to study all 4 disciplines of art because it'll give you a better understanding of art that gives you a stronger voice when you're talking about it, and it'll also help you understand what you're doing when you're actually making things. That being said, you're probably not here because you want to learn about what made Islamic architecture beautiful, or what modern art is trying to say to us. Chances are you're probably here because you're interested in learning to make art. So for the sake of this series, everything is going to be focused around making you, the viewer, better at creating art. I'll include prompts for discussing art, but for the most part, everything's going to be centered around art making and art production, and how criticism, history, and aesthetics can make you a better, more informed artist. So for the next episode, we'll jump right in, looking at some of the elements of art and how you can, and probably already do, use them when you make and look at art. For now, you'll find a Not Quiz quiz available on the Google Classroom page for you to fill out just to make sure that you understood the ideas that I tried to share with you here. It'll also let me know if I did anywhere near a good job. That's all for now, though. Thank you for watching, and if you so choose, I'll see you in the Google Classroom page and on the next episode. Okay.